The allure of the wild often tempts both the inexperienced and seasoned outdoors enthusiasts into the forest, sometimes without a weapon for defense. Hit that like button and subscribe right now. In today's episode, we go over 3 times people went unarmed into the wild and were fatally attacked by animals. Welcome to Final Affliction.
Alaska is one of the untouched wonders of the world, with miles of pristine glaciers and a truly amazing display of animal diversity. Due to this, Alaska holds more than half of America's national parks with an unlimited choice of terrain. One park in particular boasts the tallest peak in all of North America, Mount McKinley, aka Denali. Measuring over 20,000 feet, it is truly an impressive sight and attracts mountaineers from all over the world to Denali National Park and Preserve. Due to the protection that this area covers, the big 5 mammals are able to thrive here: Dall sheep, caribou, moose, wolves, and most infamously, the grizzly bear. From the beauty of the aurora borealis to the mystery of 700-million-year-old fossils, there is something for everyone to enjoy and learn about. But as a group of teenagers would soon find out, some lessons leave permanent scars. In 2011, 7 students from Staples High School in Connecticut were attending an outdoor education camp called the National Outdoor Leadership School, or NOLS for short. By this time, it was a well-established program that had been teaching students to develop their leadership and environmental awareness for the last 50 years. The boys were all of similar ages. Samuel Boas, Shane Garlock, and Noah Allaire were 16. Joshua Berg, Samuel Gottsiegen, and Simeon Melman were 17. And the last boy, Victor Martin, was 18 years old. They were taking part in an extensive 30-day wilderness training expedition and had had the best 3 weeks of their lives so far. Together, they had learned and honed their survival skills over the last few weeks, and they were now putting these skills to use as they embarked on a solo trip into the Alaskan wilderness. They confidently trekked into the bushes, walking mostly in a single-file line as there was no actual path for the majority of the way, and they had to follow each other to ensure that no one would get lost. They were prepared for any situation, having been trained for first aid and extreme wilderness survival. The final task that they have been set was a solo mission to reach a specific viewpoint without the help of any adults and using only the skills they had learned in the last 3 weeks. They were excited to prove to everyone they had what it took to survive and headed off into the woods. That evening, they decided to cross a creek as Berg and Gottsiegen led the group to their goal. The bushes were becoming very thick and difficult to push through without facing injury, in addition to the risk of them becoming separated. As they stepped towards the creek, the older boys noticed some rustling on the other side and decided to wait it out to see what it was, as their training had taught them not to take any unnecessary risks. They felt their hearts stop as they saw what emerged from the bushes: a large brown bear and her cub. This was the worst-case scenario for any wilderness expedition, as the mother bear would be much more aggressive in order to defend her cub, killing anyone on sight. Unfortunately for them, they were immediately noticed. The mother charged at them, sprinting across the creek before the boys had a chance to react. Although even if they could react, they were unarmed. She reached Gottsiegen first as he was heading the group and immediately knocked him to the ground. He tried to kick her away, but it was no use. Her size and ferocity outmatched him. She clamped her jaws onto his head and tried to crush his skull with her teeth. With blood running into his eyes and the force he felt being exerted onto his skull, he thought for sure that this is where he would die, in the mouth of a beast. Suddenly, she released his head. He thought she might run away, but he had no such luck. Instead, she latched onto his arms, biting and clawing at each one in turn, inflicting as much damage as possible. He screamed in pain as his muscles and skin were ripped from his body. Then, in hopes of finally killing the boy, she dragged her claws across his chest and punctured his lungs as he screamed out in agony. He could feel his ribs breaking under her weight and was blinded by the pain he felt. Next, she turned to the other leader, Joshua Berg. She swatted at him with her giant paws, the sharp claws ripping into his skin with each swipe. Her attack was short-lived, however, as she quickly turned her attention back to Gottsagen, who was screaming for the other boys to set off the emergency beacon to call for help. While Noah Allaire attempted to pull the alarm, the bear attacked him. She swatted him back and forth in her paws like a rag doll, blood flying from his body as her claws punctured his skin. Once again, she discarded the boy to move to another to attack, leaving Noah gasping for breath as he felt his lungs slowly deflate. She spotted Victor a little further away, who had been watching the carnage take place, his feet rooted in the ground in fear, unable to do anything but watch. She charged at him next, and his life flashed before his eyes. She grabbed his leg in her jaw and bit down hard, almost severing his entire limb. He screamed out in pain, and surprisingly, she immediately let go, rushing out into the forest and finally out of sight. The boys watched as she and her cub disappeared into the leaves and prayed she would not come back. They were already lucky enough to be alive, as they knew that she would definitely finish the job if she returned. Luckily for them, she had left the scene and would not return again. The entire ordeal had taken less than 5 minutes, but had left half the group fighting for their lives. The uninjured boys ran to the aid of their friends as the rain quickly began to pour and beat down on them, washing their blood into the creek. They activated their personal locator beacons to call out to anyone in the area to help them and attempted to set up camp around the dying boys to protect them from the rain. At 9:30 p.m., the Rescue Coordination Center called troopers to report the signal, and they were soon sent to rescue the teenagers at 3 a.m. While they were waiting, the boys tried to keep their friends conscious. Samuel Boas had graduated from the Westport Emergency Medical Services EMT program just a month previous and had already completed 100 hours of emergency medical training. He was able to use his skills under extreme pressure and with limited resources, saving their lives. They used plastic bags to close the wounds as best they could and bandaged it with gauze. They were all exhausted and traumatized and just trying to survive until help could arrive. Working together with the other boys, he was able to keep them alive until 3 a.m. when the emergency services were finally able to find their tent and fly them to safety. After assessing their damages, the team decided to separate them depending on their injuries, and as Joshua Berg and Samuel Gottsagen were without a doubt the worst injured of the group, they were immediately flown to Providence, Alaska Medical Center in Anchorage and admitted into intensive care where doctors attempted to save their lives. The other boys were flown to Matsu Medical Center to treat their minor injuries and were released to their families soon after. A secondary crew was sent back to the area to retrieve the remaining teenagers from the area, even though they were not even aware of the attack or that there was a mother bear hunting in the area. They continued their search to find the bear, but they were ultimately unsuccessful, leaving the bear to roam and raise her cub as she had intended. Since the attack, the boys have come forward to explain their experience and warn others to be careful. There was ultimately nothing that they could have done to prevent the attack, and as it was all happening in a matter of minutes, quick thinking was not necessarily possible with such an intense time limit. They state that they will forever carry the physical and mental scars from that day and underwent intensive therapy to help them recover from their ordeal. The sounds of the broken bones and the screaming of their friends will never be unheard, but they are working towards their own recoveries. Luckily, Joshua Berg and Samuel Gottsagen were able to survive the attack without any permanent injury, but their recoveries were long and hard as they underwent multiple life-saving surgeries. NOLS have also spoken about the event, praising the boys for the survival skills, and have stated that even if an adult leader was present, the outcome would likely have remained the same, meaning that the boys ultimately did everything that they could in the moment. They remain positive about their experience and are thankful to have narrowly escaped their terrifying final affliction.
Glacier National Park in western Montana is one of America's most popular national parks, with over 700 miles of hiking trails and almost 800 natural lakes. There are many activities and sites that attract millions. It is perfect for someone who wants to reconnect with nature and discover themselves in the solitude of pure wilderness. With 25 active glaciers, the landscape is an incredibly rare sight to behold, and truly something to see once in your lifetime, a place to visit before you die. Despite this, most people would not like this to be the place that they die, but for some, they were not given the choice. Sometimes, life takes a dangerous turn in unknown territory, as two women discovered in 1964. Our story today begins on August 12th in 1964, where young lovers Julie Helgeson and Roy Ducat were camping together on their first solo trip together. They worked together at the Glacier Park Lodge, where their romance had first begun, and now they were finally able to gain some solitude and privacy away from the prying eyes of their colleagues. They had made their way up to the viewpoint earlier in the day, hitching rides from drivers along the way just to be able to see the beautiful view in front of them as the sun was setting. They set up their camp about a quarter-mile from a nearby chalet, which was booked up for the night, and settled in for an evening of romance and beauty, falling asleep in each other's arms. At around midnight, Julie was awoken by a sound outside of their tent, a rustling from the bushes that she immediately recognized. She shook Roy awake, urgently whispering that there was a bear outside. They were both very familiar with the bears in the area and knew that they were in great danger. At present, the animal was just walking around their camp, sniffing their gear in search of something to eat, but was seemingly unaware that the couple were huddled within the thin nylon material of the tent. Suddenly, the bear tore through their shelter and grabbed Roy's sleeping bag. It began to shake him violently and thrashed its head back and forth in an attempt to kill him. Roy could feel the force behind the animal's bite as he was thrown to the ground, trying to keep as still and quiet as possible so that the bear would leave him alone. The bear had other ideas. Once it had thrown him out of the tent, it jumped onto his back. Julie could only watch in horror and pray that she wouldn't be noticed. The bear began to bite into Roy's back and legs, hoping to break through the sleeping bag and get to his meal within. Roy couldn't help but scream from the pain, feeling the weight of the animal on top of him and the jaws sink deeper into his body. Suddenly, he remembered his training from the lodge. Play dead if you come into contact with a brown bear. He immediately went limp and stopped screaming, biting his tongue to stop himself. Thankfully, this method worked almost instantly, and the bear walked away from Roy, leading it straight for Julie instead. Seeing the bear pivot its direction towards her, she began screaming as she thought her lover had just been mauled to death in front of her. Alarmed by her noise, the bear charged her and grabbed her by the legs, clamping its jaws tightly around her ankles, and began dragging her into the forest and away from camp. Roy lay there playing dead throughout the entire event. When they were both out of sight, Roy pulled himself up and ran to get some equipment from the camp, hoping to be able to scare the bear away from Julie and save his love. In a panic, He attempted to find a flashlight to scare the bear, but he was quickly realizing how badly he was actually hurt and started feeling lightheaded due to blood loss. Knowing that Julie would not stand a chance if he passed out, he began to run up to the nearby chalet to beg someone for help. As he made his way to the chalet, he stumbled upon Don Gullett, who was sleeping in a tent near the chalet, undisturbed by the noise that Roy and Julie had been making. He quickly awoke him from his deep sleep and told him what had happened. As he was telling the story, the pair could see lights begin to turn on in the chalet as other residents were disturbed by the noises and screams of Julie in the distance. Don knew that the residents needed to be informed to get help, but by the time they would reach the chalet, it would be too late. He began shining a bright torch at the residents instead, signaling SOS in Morse code. One of the people in the chalet recognized the signal for help and shouted out towards them asking what was wrong. The men replied with a bone-chilling message: "Bear." The chalet burst into action. Joan Devereaux, a naturalist, immediately called for emergency assistance from authorities. Steve Pierre, a member of the local Native American tribe, assisted in locating the bear with a small group of other visitors. After gathering some volunteers and flashlights, Steve and his team set out towards the site of the attack. The message from Joan had reached the forest rangers, and they too began to set up an emergency rescue to save and retrieve Julie. A helicopter equipped with FLIR and night vision technology was deployed into the area within minutes after receiving the call and began to search the area for any signs of Julie or the bear. Meanwhile, Roy was begging people to come back into the forest with him to save Julie, but Joan advised against it and told people that they should stay put until the rangers arrived. While Roy continued to argue with the group, Steve and his team had found a blood trail that led into the forest and decided to follow it. They hoped to find Julie alive and well at the end of it. They began to shout her name in the hopes of a response, and, miraculously, they heard a very faint reply that led them straight to her. What they discovered next shocked them. She had somehow been stripped of most of her clothes, leaving her torn skin exposed to the elements. There were puncture marks all over her body from where the bear had grabbed and dragged her along. She was weak from blood loss, and the team instantly knew that there was little hope for her. Regardless, they held her hand in support and brought her back to the chalet. Miles away from a hospital and on the verge of death, they called in the chalet priest. With Roy at her side as the chalet priest read the Lord's Prayer, she finally succumbed to her injuries at 4:13 a.m. on August 13th. She was the first ever fatal bear attack to take place in Glacier National Park, but she would not be the last. 4 hours after Julie's attack and 8 miles away, there were 5 employees working at the McDonald Lodge who had closed up for the night and were settling down to sleep, ready for the rest of their shifts tomorrow morning. The employees included Paul Dunn, Michelle Coons, with brothers Ray and Ron Nelson also present. As they were relaxing at their campsite, they spotted a large brown bear walking nearby, who quickly raided the camp. The campers stayed silent and watched in fear, praying they wouldn't be discovered. When it sauntered off, the group decided to quickly move camps so that they wouldn't run into the animal again later. Despite moving to another camp, the bear returned several times that night, sniffing their camp and attempting to steal more food and grunting from the dark trees nearby. The group continued to lay silent inside their sleeping bags, knowing that a single noise or movement could mean certain death. Finally, the bear re-entered the camp for the final time and began sniffing around the campers as they lay in silence. Paul realized too late that his sleeping bag wasn't properly closed, and before he could even move, he felt the bear's nose poke inside. Smelling the man within, it suddenly grabbed the bag and began to shake him violently. He was able to slip out before any real damage was inflicted and managed to run straight into a nearby tree, almost certainly escaping a mauling in the process. Knowing that the bear had discovered them, he began to shout to his friends to run and no longer lay in silence, as it wouldn't save them anymore. They all jumped up, surprising the bear, and they began to run into the trees. Although stunned, the bear recovered almost instantly and began to sniff around the abandoned sleeping bags. From a nearby tree, overlooking the bear sniffing around their abandoned camp, the group realized they were missing someone. Michelle. Michelle had stayed in her sleeping bag, hoping that playing dead would still work. After all, that was how she was taught to react if she found herself in a bear attack. The bear quickly discovered her and bit into her arm. She shouted out to her friends for help, screaming that she had been caught by the animal and it had her arm, but they had no way to help her. She knew she was in a terrible situation and prayed that she would be able to survive. The group lost sight of her as the animal tugged her into the forest, but her screams could be heard for miles. Terrified, the group sought refuge in the trees until dawn and waited for the sunlight to finally show the fate of their friend. Strangely, they were unable to find any sign of her by morning and immediately abandoned camp and hiked back towards the lodge nearby. They came across the ranger station first and burst in, hurriedly explaining the situation, and stated that their friend was missing. The rangers had already dealt with Julie's bear attack just hours previous, so they initially believed them to be reporting the same fatality. But they soon realized that the situation was much more urgent, as there were possibly 2 bear fatalities in the same night. They quickly gathered their equipment and headed towards their camp. During their search, they encountered a local fisherman who explained that he had seen a bear dragging a girl into the woods by the mountain, and they quickly changed their direction accordingly. As soon as they arrived at the place where the fisherman had reported seeing Michelle, the rangers discovered overwhelming evidence that she was tragically no longer alive. The path was covered in blood, skin, and tissue, leading directly to the corpse. It was a horrific sight to see. She had been brutally torn apart, and her body had been casually cast aside and scattered in the forest. Horrified by their discovery, they called for the rescue team, who retrieved the body and brought Michelle back to the lodge. After already dealing with another killing just hours before, the rangers quickly began to lay bait traps to lure the bear into the open to shoot it. Unfortunately, they were unsuccessful at tracking down the man-eating bear. Despite this, one of the rangers came face to face with the bear the next day, and after some stalking, they were able to finally take the bear down. They autopsied the animal and found parts of Michelle within its stomach, finally ending the rampage. That night, Glacier National Park changed from no recorded bear fatalities in history to 2 in just one night. A heartbreaking and truly unlucky story for both of the women, who just wanted to enjoy a simple camping trip, but instead met their terrifying final affliction. Covering nearly 600 acres of land, the Apshawa Preserve is one of the largest nature reserves in New Jersey and is under 50 miles from New York City. It's a popular escape for those hoping to leave the bustle of the city for a more relaxing atmosphere. The protection of the New Jersey Conservation Foundation has allowed the area to flourish with oak and maple trees, along with a great diversity of animal and bird species. One of the largest inhabitants of this reserve is the black bear, and their numbers are on the rise as their numbers creep towards 2,500 individuals. These bears are considerably smaller and less aggressive than their brown cousins and are less likely to cause a conflict and will usually stay within their own territory. Unfortunately, as their habitat has slowly increased in popularity as a hiking destination, more and more people have entered their habitat with little to no awareness of the danger they are putting themselves in. Darsh Patel was a 22-year-old student who was studying technology and informatics at Rutgers University. On September 21, 2014, Darsh and 4 friends decided to go hiking on the Abshawa Preserve. They had all individually visited the preserve in the past and were avid nature enthusiasts, so they were all pretty confident in their own abilities. After packing their bags full of their essentials, they set off the next day using various park and trail maps. They began hiking at 8 a.m. that morning and traveled along the first loop of the trail, taking photos with their cell phones of their surroundings and any animals that they encountered along the way. They were able to capture some images of the deer that grazed in the nearby fields, safe in the knowledge that the deer fences would keep anything off of their paths. They were mistaken. There were some unprotected areas, and certain predators knew exactly how to take advantage of these weak spots. As the group was finishing the first loop, one of the boys suddenly shouted out that he could see a large black bear creeping the ledge in the distance. Excitedly, they all turned to the ledge that he was pointing at, but they couldn't see anything, as the bear had already run off. Someone suggested that they should go back to the ledge to try and get a closer look at the animal, but the others decided that it wouldn't be smart to risk getting close to a bear that they could no longer see. It could be anywhere, after all. Instead, they continued to hike further down the trail, keeping an eye out for another possible bear sighting and hoping that this time they'd be able to capture the animal within their camera lens. As the track became a little more unkept, the group were forced to enter the unfenced areas of the park. Excited about the potential of capturing a bear on camera up close, they entered the fields in the unfenced part of the park. They were taken aback by how stunning the sights were, marveling at the beauty of the Butler Reservoir and the rolling green landscape around them. After walking for 7 hours, they decided to take a short break. They reassessed their plan and decided to continue to the connector loop, which was mostly unfenced. They climbed up a ledge to eat their snacks of granola bars while they rested for about half an hour before continuing their hike. Suddenly, Darsh spotted the black bear that his friend had seen earlier, only this time it was much closer and staring straight at him. Darsh froze and stared back at the 300-pound bear as it looked him up and down. Excitedly, he began to slowly raise his camera to capture the image of the animal only 100 yards away. Instead of being worried he'd be attacked, he was instead concerned about missing out on a photo. He was convinced that the animal would be scared of him, giving him the advantage. Darsh's friends spotted the bear as well, but they started to realize that the bear was slowly creeping towards them, seemingly beginning its hunt. The boys became worried and wanted to leave, knowing that they wouldn't stand a chance, but Darsh remained in front of the bear, taking more and more pictures. His friends began to warn him that the bear was now stalking him, but he was too engrossed in his photography to notice or care. Suddenly, the bear began to pick up speed and quickly closed the 100-yard gap between itself and the boy, growling as it ran. All the boys ran away at the sight of this massive animal running at them, all except Darsh. He continued taking pictures, photographing the bear as it got closer and closer to him, and his friends screamed at him to leave and run with them. He was too engrossed in his photos to fully understand what was happening until it was all too late. He finally realized that the bear was only 15 yards away and panicked. He turned on his heel and tried to run away at the last minute, but the bear was still behind him, running faster and faster. The boys separated and ran down different paths, hoping to confuse the bear so that it would stop pursuing them. It worked for a second, and the bear stopped in its tracks, wondering who to follow. But its eyes quickly caught sight of Darsh again, who was the farthest behind the group. Darsh had gained some significant distance from the bear while it stopped running, when suddenly the worst happened. He tripped on a rock and twisted his ankle while looking over his shoulder at the bear. He screamed in fear as he watched the bear continue its charge at him, knowing he had no chance of escape this time. The bear immediately closed the gap and pounced on Darsh, tearing into his body with his huge jaws. It bit down hard on his body, ripping skin and muscle from his face, torso, and arms. It grabbed him by the legs and began to drag him across the floor as blood began to saturate the dirt beneath him. The animal ferociously chewed into his body, leaving numerous cuts and bites all over him. trying to pull his limbs out of his body. He screamed in agony and called for his friends, but there was nothing they could do. They hadn't brought any bear spray, and playing dead was no longer an option, as he was soon to be dead anyways. He tried to push the bear off of him, but he stood no chance. The bear was too strong. Covered in dirt and his own blood, Darsh Patel died alone in the woods. The rest of the group were still running, scared out of their minds as they'd heard the anguished screams of their friend behind them. They were fairly certain that the bear had killed Darsh, but they didn't know if the bear would still continue after them once it was done. Once they had gotten far enough away and couldn't hear the crunching of an approaching bear, they phoned for the police to report Darsh as missing.
911, where's your emergency?
Hey, hello. I'm on Macoupin Road. It's 81 Macoupin Road. I believe I'm in West Milford or somewhere around there. We were hiking and we saw a bear, and we all started running, and it started chasing us. 2 of us are okay. 1 other person answered, but 2 were really close, and I'm scared out of my mind for them. I want to go back, but I'm hurt, and I don't know what to do.
You're hurt, you said?
Like, not badly. I just scraped my leg. It's nothing major, but I'm more worried about them. Can anyone get here anytime really soon, please?
Are you on a trail?
Yeah, we were on the trail.
Well, it's going to take them a while to get anywhere near you if you're on a trail.
A search party was quickly organized by West Milford police to find the young man, and they combed the area for 2 hours straight. Finally, they found the brutalized remains of Darsh Patel's body. It was hardly recognizable and completely covered in blood, body parts strewn across the trail. As the search team were observing the mess of the body before them, they suddenly heard rustling behind them as the bear emerged from the bushes. It was coming to collect its meal once again. Startled by the number of people in front of its food, it began to get aggressive with the men present, who were trying to shoo it away. The search team's shouts at the bear only further enraged the animal. Finally, for the safety of everyone, and to avenge the young college student, they shot and killed the ferocious beast, ending its reign of terror. They collected Darsh's body and returned it to the family, leaving them to grieve for their son who had died too soon. It was declared that the group had done nothing wrong and that the attack was unprovoked, but they believed that the attack may have happened because the animal was extremely hungry. Smelling the boys' granola snacks on the ledge, it began to approach them to get the food from them, ultimately killing Darsh in the process. Running also would have activated the animal's natural predatory instincts, which triggered it to chase the group. Ultimately, it was an unfortunate accident that resulted in the death of a young man with a bright future. After analyzing the bear, shreds of Darsh's clothes as well as his skin and blood was found inside the bear's stomach. Darsh's phone was also found near his body with bite marks on it. When police looked inside his phone, they found his terrifying final photos before death. This was Darsh's final photograph he took before being fatally mauled. The bear is seen running towards him at less than 20 feet away. It was shortly after this moment when Darsh Patel realized the seriousness of the situation. It was at this moment he decided to run. Less than 5 minutes later, he met his horrifying final affliction.